Thank you so much. It's good to see you, sir. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Doing well.
Thank you. A lot of news from Afghanistan. So the Moscow summit is approaching on Thursday. Also, there is one coming up in Istanbul. Let's start with Moscow summit. For the first time, Ambassador Khalizad, as a U.S. representative, attending summit in Moscow on Afghanistan. What is your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think all too often Russia has tried to be a spoiler in the proceedings. They obviously want to do anything they can to undermine American influence in any part of the world. I'm cautiously optimistic that this is more of an effort, and by Mr. Khalizad attending, that his goal is to ensure that there is more buy-in, more cooperation with some of the regional actors that will, be dealing with Afghanistan's, future economic, trade, and other relations. So we'll wait to see how this will play out. But I think it's a good sign that there's American attendance. But again, Russia oftentimes tries to insert themselves in a negative fashion, and that's something we must avoid.
Russia has ties with the Taliban, and there have been also other summits in Moscow hosting and meeting with the Taliban leaders, and Taliban kind of like choose to talk to Moscow as well. How do you assess the relationship between Russia and the Taliban? Is Russia trying to undermine U.S. efforts, let's say, for peace or U.S. presence in Afghanistan?
I think it's never too late for Russia to do the right thing. But we haven't seen that yet. And I think a lot of their engagement has been geared towards weapons sales. It's been geared towards currying favor rather than promoting a plan for peace and stability.
How do you assess the Doha deal, the agreement between U.S. and Taliban? Do you think it is still like a solid, let's say, valid deal for Biden administration as well to follow up with?
We're coming up quickly on the May 1st date that have been agreed upon for as part of the withdrawal agreement. And now, obviously, there are plenty of instances where the Taliban were not upholding their end. And again, as we've talked about before, it can be challenging when we say Taliban. How many people are we talking about? Are we talking about Quetta Shura, Peshawar Shura? Does it include the Haqqani network? What do we do about Daesh? And all of these entities that sometimes fight the Taliban but are under that broad umbrella. But at least, the conditions set forth, under the Doha agreement for a May 1st withdrawal, are also had a strong focus on the Taliban not attacking, international forces, not attacking urban centers. We've seen attacks in urban centers in not only large statement attacks, but also targeted assassinations. And ultimately, many of those underlying conditions were not objective and also not verifiable whether or not the Taliban have been in compliance. So, we will see what happens. I know the Biden administration is looking at a range of options, but I think there is a concerted belief that this is the time to be planning Afghanistan's future, and we can no longer take for granted a continued and strong American troop presence in the region forever.
And do you think Biden will favor extension of troops to stay in Afghanistan until there is a deal?
I don't think there's been a decision that's been reached. I think we're going to see what happens in the coming weeks on that front. But again, I'm optimistic that there's a number of signs that, again, the U.S. does not intend to be in Afghanistan forever. We are looking to find that pathway towards prosperity, stability, and peace, and that does not necessarily involve a long-term troop presence.
Washington also proposed the formation of participatory government, interim government for Afghanistan, where the Taliban should share the power, so there's a transition for a democratic state. Do you think Taliban will abide with this and they will value these democratic values and will agree on this?
I think that the Taliban have an opportunity to be pragmatic and to look in a long-term sense. I would not be surprised that anything is on the table, including power sharing agreements, and whether that's at a national or regional level, some acknowledgement of the geographic concentrations rather than continuing to fight a civil war. Again, these are I'm confident that there are discussions being had, and I'm not in those discussions, but I think it's important to realize that we're coming up on 20 years of American involvement in Afghanistan. It's by far the longest war the U.S. has been in, and one where our continued presence is not strengthening the country, but also sowing some of those seeds of undermining stability and prosperity for the Afghan people.
So we are aware of Taliban always aiming at Islamic Emirates, and they still believe in that. So do you think Taliban ideology change and they might be transitioning to a different style of government if all the parties agree to be part of it?
I think we have to look at who are some of the folks who are behind the Taliban. Some of the regional influences that would much rather see stability, even if that's not perfect, than have to deal with continued large refugee flows and refugee presence and unstable neighbors in the region. So again, I would like to think that in any negotiation, if everybody walks away happy, it was not a negotiation. This is going to be a give and take, but on all sides.
The U.S. is hoping to involve regional countries, as you mentioned, Iran, China, Russia, also Pakistan, to push for a result in these negotiations. What's your concerns about these regional countries in the relationship, which may influence the Taliban to get a desired outcome after these negotiations?
I think if all of the actors, all of the countries that have been involved in that region make that acknowledgement that we're no longer on sides, right? We may have a desired outcome, but very quickly, and I think this has been the history of Afghanistan going back centuries of being caught in the middle of these fights and of these tensions. And when you're caught in the middle, you always wind up last. I think it's important that we continue to have multilateral negotiations and that it not just be viewed as one side trying to claim victory or the other side trying to accuse one of defeat, but something where we prioritize what is in the best interest of all actors, which is the long-term peace, prosperity, and stability of Afghanistan.
So the Moscow summit, also the upcoming international summit in Istanbul, in bringing other countries, international world, international community, European Union, do you think this will also help Afghanistan to reach maybe a good deal and a solution to end the long war for Afghanistan?
I certainly don't think the Moscow summit will be a finale or even be a conclusion, but there's been Russian attempts to intervene and to try to come between the Taliban and the Afghan government before. Again, I don't have confidence that the Russians are looking for a long-term stable solution, but trying to maintain some relevance as their influence on the world stage recedes. And obviously, Russia back when it was the Soviet Union, has a very long and dark history of intervention in Afghanistan. Again, we'll see what happens out of this summit. I'm not optimistic, but I remain a believer in the fact that we need to have multilateral engagement so that the conclusion doesn't feel as if it's just a victory or a defeat for one or the other, but has investment from all regional actors.
What's your thoughts about the level of violence by the Taliban? It didn't decrease, it's still increasing, and there is a series of terror, target killing of civil society and journalists. Who do you think is behind it? Do you think Taliban involved in this violence against Afghans to spread more chaos and fear among people?
Yeah, I don't have any information on that. Obviously, there's been a long track record of intimidation of this kind of terror tactic of assassinations to silence those in civil society, those who engage in the media, in the courts, in government, or who deal, or in education as well, who deal with international organizations to try to further isolate, further marginalize, and sow fear. This is unacceptable. It is not evidence that the Taliban are upholding the terms of the May 1st agreement. We haven't seen the official claiming of responsibility, to my knowledge, for those attacks. Obviously, there are many things that the Taliban do and then claim, some that they do and don't claim, and other things that they're not responsible for that they still lay claim to. So it's always a challenge to talk and use the word Taliban when there's both an official structure and a loose collection of violent actors. But it's clear that there are plenty who want to continue to undermine the peace and stability of this moment and to sow that fear and discord.
So how do you assess, the last question, thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. How do you assess Biden's strategy so far for Afghanistan? Since almost 2 months he's in office, there are some talks about Afghanistan. If, let's say, the negotiation, the deal fails, do you think Biden has a B plan for Afghanistan?
I'm cautiously optimistic, obviously, both within the military, within the defense communities, and within our diplomatic communities. There's a long history of professional and career engagement in Afghanistan. I've talked to I have a number of colleagues in the House who've been serving in Afghanistan, and whether it was in the military and the diplomatic corps and the intelligence community. So there is a large body of institutional knowledge, and I think also a growing realization that in order to improve the situation, we can't just do what we've done before. We can't just go back on autopilot. This is an opportunity to reset. This is an opportunity to chart the next decade of stability for Afghanistan, but we need to be realistic about both the investment and the expectations on the outcome side. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but there are definitely some difficult decisions to be made in the weeks ahead.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. I appreciate it.